best EQ is no EQ. Discuss. Hi everybody, I'm Adam Steele and I'm usually from Hop Pole Studios, but today finds me at Middle Farm Studios, which is one of the nicest recording studios in England. It's got a wonderful big stone drum room. We've been tracking with Michael Mallion, who's been helping me to do some new material as well as other projects that we're working on. And they have some wonderful gear here as well as the great space, including this Trident 70 series console behind me, some EQs down here from Tweed Audio, which are kind of Neve-esque, but not quite. There's some really nice stuff in the racks, and we've been using a lot of it. We've been doing a lot of recording with EQ on the way in, so that everything's committed and sounds great. But today's video, as you can see from the title, is the old phrase, the best EQ is no EQ. Having said that, why am I using EQ on everything? I think it's time to try and expand on and explain what that phrase actually means or should mean in proper context. What it doesn't mean is do not use EQ. That's not the idea at all. The short version is get it as good as you can at the source. Now, there are loads of reasons for this, because when it comes down to it, the less you have to do with things like filters, which is what equalization is, the more accurate a sound you will end up with. And generally speaking, the happier you will be with the end result. If you've ever done a mix and you've found that you've used EQ plugin after EQ plugin after EQ plugin on a single source and you just can't get it to sound right, sometimes you strip all that back and then use just maybe one EQ plugin or piece of hardware to get exactly the right dial in, and suddenly it feels a lot better. Why is that? What that comes down to is phase. A lot of people think that phase is either in or out, and that is not the case. It can be in or out, but usually we call that polarity. That's more to do with voltage when you've got something coming from a microphone, say, whether it comes in forwards or backwards, voltage-wise. But when it actually comes to phase, there's a lot more in between. In my recent video about 96 kilohertz and all that kind of crazy jazz, one thing that I did show is that EQs on screen, you can see when I adjust them, they change the phase characteristics of that signal. That's part of what the filtering process does. Some parts of the signal kind of come in slightly later or slightly sooner because of the way that the source has been manipulated. What that can mean on its own, if you've got, say, a mono signal and you tastefully EQ it to suit, can mean very little. It can mean that you get the sound that you want with pretty much no drawbacks. One of the issues you get is in multi-mic scenarios, a really good example of which is a drum kit. If you've got lots of microphones around a drum kit and you start changing the EQ on a couple of the microphones, that can start to affect what you hear on the other microphones, because they're suddenly partially out of phase with each other, and you can end up with artifacts where one microphone's, say, mids, if you've changed something, can affect how the sound is coming through the other mics. And especially when you end up with things like gating, that can be when it's really strange, because you might have, I don't know, for example, you might get a snare top mic and lift the top with an EQ. Sounds nice, but you might have a nearby tom microphone that's got a different EQ on, and with the gate closed on the tom, the snare sounds great, but as soon as that gate is open on the tom, the snare sounds weird, and that's because suddenly there are two sources with different phase manipulations on, and they can produce a sound that's nice, but then if it's there, then the relationship is gone again, then there, then gone again. That relationship will keep changing. And it's something that I find a lot when the source has been really heavily EQ'd. So coming back to the best EQ is no EQ, that can be to do with choosing the right microphone, placing the right microphone to avoid spill so that there's less bleed between microphones so that that phase manipulation is less of an issue. It can mean having the right kind of sound to begin with. Mic placement does affect tone quite a lot. You might find that you want more brightness from, say, a guitar cabinet. You might move the microphone a little bit to achieve that. You might want to have more low end or less low end by manipulating the microphone distance. And that's all completely valid. And the more you can do in the analog realm, that is to say in the physical realm, by moving the microphones and choosing appropriate microphones to go in the right places, the little bit of EQ you might need here and there to really kind of finish the thing off will be significantly less than if you're trying to carve out these corrective pieces and ending up with further problems down the line. Now, some of you will probably say, yeah, but I use loads of EQ on everything and it was fine. It might have been fine. You might have found, if you go back through some of your projects, that you either had to manually gate things more than you thought, isolate things more than you thought you did, and you might have had to do some quite difficult things to make it all work. Whereas if it's all done in a kind of an analog domain, if you've got spill between instruments, for example, you've really got to be on top of this. If you wanted a brighter sound, a brighter microphone might have been the way to go. The other thing is manipulating close microphones or blends of microphones can be detrimental in between microphones, but you might find that if you get the right balance between all those elements, then sending that through a group bus and then using a little bit of EQ there, maybe a passive EQ like a Pultec or something, might give you much more sonic integrity than if you're really aggressively changing the separate microphones, because once things are blended together, then if you change the phase with EQ, that's not changing its relation, that's changing the result, which is, I think, one of the reasons that a lot of mixing engineers now do a lot of what I call top-down mixing, where they'll have a master bus that might have some EQ on it. They might have groups for, say, the drums, the guitars, with a little bit of gentle EQ on those. It means there's less for those engineers to do to get the sound they want from messing with the sources. If they can just balance the levels, that's another reason why, say, I try and get nice phase-aligned microphones on a guitar cabinet and then just blend them to taste. I can change the characteristic of a sound without touching a single EQ and messing up the phase. That in turn means that my overall sources are more phase coherent, which can result in more punch, more transient attack, more detail in the mids because you're not getting these kind of phase cancellation little bits. It can result in more impact. It can result in you having a much easier time pulling a mix together. And that's what it's all about, right? Is making your own life easy. A lot of kind of issues can be resolved through advanced techniques, but if you don't have those issues to resolve in the first place, life is good. And a good life is what we want, because then you'll probably find yourself not having to do any or many revisions on your mixes to get happy clients. And that's what we all want. So, like I said again, I use EQ, but the best EQ is no EQ. Hope you enjoyed this little kind of journey into what people mean by a really irritating phrase. I know it annoys me sometimes, especially it did until I really understood it. Thanks to the patrons on Patreon for helping me out with making videos like this. Thanks to the guys at Middle Farm, Pete Miles and his wonderful team, for letting me talk nonsense in front of a Trident desk. Thanks Mike Marlian for playing drums for me, and thanks everybody for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.